American student, even more every American adult, is regarded as someone who is just out to make a lot of money. Really, 16% of these students regarded their main goal and concern in life to make a lot of money. I'm quoting literally, make a lot of money. And you know what the top class, the top category, we say category, what do you say? Category was among, you excuse me, but I know I am speaking a marvelous accent without the slightest English. Now, you know what the top category was? 78% of these American youngsters were concerned, as they expressed it themselves, with finding a meaning and purpose in their lives. So this is a realistic view on man. And you know, you won't believe it, gray hair, my age, I started taking flying lessons recently. Do you know what my flying instructor told me? If you are starting here, wish to get here, say east, heading for this, and you have a crosswind, you will drift and you will land here. So you have to do what we pilots call crabbing, he told me, C-R-A-B, crabbing. You have to head for north of this airfield, and you have to fly that way, you see, as if you headed in this direction. If you are heading here above this airfield, then you will actually land here. But if you head for here, you are landing here. This holds also for man, I would say. If we take man as he really is, we make him worse. But if we overestimate him, it's premature, your applause, you will soon know why. If we seem to be idealists and are overrating man, and looking at him that high, here above, you know what happens? We promote him to what he really can be. So we have to be idealists in a way, because then we'll wind up as the real realists. And you know who has said this? If we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. This was not my flight instructor, this was not me, this was Goethe. He said this verbally. And now you will understand why I, in one of my writings, once said, this is the most apt maxim and motto for any psychotherapeutic activity. So if you don't recognize a young man's will to meaning, man's search for meaning, you make him worse, you make him dull, you make him frustrated, you still add and contribute to his frustration. While if you presuppose in this man, if in this so-called criminal or juvenile delinquent or drug abuse and so forth, there must be a what we call spark, a spark of search for meaning. Let's recognize this, let's presuppose it, and then you will elicit it from him, and you will make him become what he in principle is capable of becoming.
Physician and Holocaust survivor Dr. Viktor Frankl, who you just saw the video of, said between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I often wonder what life would be like if more of us could learn to get into that gap, get into that space, and choose our response to our life circumstances. Perhaps even learn to alchemize our life circumstances, just like Dr. Viktor Frankl did. As a medical doctor working and studying in this space, I believe we'd be happier, that we'd be healthier, and there's a very personal reason why I care. When I was growing up, I never met my father. Never actually even saw a picture of him. I remember so many times kids would ask me, "Where's your dad?" And I would get this just pang of embarrassment because the truth is I didn't know. And the little bit I knew was kind of too embarrassing to share. I knew a few good things. So my dad had wavy brown hair, green eyes, supposedly a handsome man. I heard that he was really kind and that he was highly intelligent. But I also heard that he had a feisty temper and a really bad drug problem. Not something you exactly want to share with all your friends. And so I was a little bit nervous about looking for him. But still, there was this part of me that longed to see his smile, to hear his laugh, to get to know his personality, to feel his embrace, and maybe even see the parts of him that had become parts of me. And so, when I was 18 years old, all grown up, I finally got the courage to go look for him. And I started on this long series of phone calls with my dad's ex-wife's relatives, crisscrossing North America, until I actually found this man, Kenny, in Alabama. And I was on the phone with him, and Kenny said he was my dad's ex-brother-in-law. And I was so excited, my heart started to pound, because I knew that Kenny knew my dad. And in this moment, this was the closest I had ever been yet to meeting him. And so I explained excitedly to Kenny exactly who I am. And there's this pregnant pause. And Kenny says, "You know your dad's dead, right?" Whew. This moment was just one of the most shocking moments I've ever experienced because it hadn't even crossed my mind. My dad was in his 40s at the time. And just as I feel this wave of emotion starting to crest, all I know how to do in that moment is to focus on my breath. And as I do this, I find this sliver of peace. I find this part of me, this calm, this sunshine above the storm, above the clouds, this little tiny piece, and it was tiny at that moment, that knew everything was going to be okay. This part of me was okay no matter what came. And this is a good thing I found it just as this tsunami of grief and shock washes over me. So Kenny goes on. And it's a good thing I found it because he tells me details that make this whole picture even worse. 2 years before, my dad had gotten in a bad breakup. And in that moment, he decided, in a rash decision, not being able to get into that gap, he decided to take a bottle of pills, lethal dose, wash it down with a liter of vodka, and then was arrested. And a couple of hours later, my dad, this handsome, kind, intelligent man, 43 years old, died alone in a jail cell. So why? How did this happen? How did this happen to my father who had so much going for him? And what if he had learned to get into that gap? Why is it that some people like Viktor Frankl are able to get into, actually experience some of the worst circumstances that we could imagine in the world, like 3 different concentration camps? He lived through that, but not only lived through it, he was able to then get in the gap and alchemize his life circumstances to recover and then be able to contribute to society afterwards. He turned the crap he got in his life into a really positive contribution. And what if we could train this capacity in more people? I wanted to know this. I really wanted to know the answer to this question. And so for years, I continued meditation, and finally it dawned on me. I had actually learned this meditation practice 2 years before I got my dad's news, when I was 16 years old. And it was so simple, this mindfulness practice. You've probably all heard the buzzword these days, mindfulness. It's so simple. It was just focusing on my breath. And doing this for 2 years before looking for my dad, I actually trained my brain to find that peace, to find the calm in the chaos, that little part of me that was always okay, even in the worst moment of my life. So I continue meditating for years, end up years later here in New York City, starting medical school. And this is when meditation becomes even a bigger part of my life, because I start to think about the words. Meditation, medication, meditation, medication, medicine. Coincidence? Actually, no. It's Latin. These words all come from the same Latin root, medere, which means to heal. So maybe even the ancient Romans had a sense that there was a healing capacity to meditation. And then I start to teach some of the patients who are open to it, patients who are receptive. I teach them basic mindfulness. And as I do this, I see they start to transform, they start to heal. Some still have the same chronic pain. That's the stimulus, but they're able to respond to it better. Other patients can cope better with diagnoses. And some even are able to get off of medications like sleeping pills, antidepressants, and other drugs. So I see this happening in their lives, and then my nerdy mind takes over, and I finally make this connection that practicing mindfulness is just like going to the gym for the brain and the nervous system. So you imagine I have a dumbbell in my right arm. I don't actually work out. Well, I do yoga, but that's another workout. But if I have a dumbbell in my right arm and I lift it against the resistance of gravity, every time I lift that weight, I'm actually building new muscle tissue in my right arm. The same thing is true with mindfulness. If I'm focusing on my breath, every time my mind wanders, which it wanders, that's what minds do, and it's totally normal, as soon as I bring my mind back against the resistance of thoughts, I'm actually building new connections in my brain. So there's a neuroscientist, Sarah Lazar at Harvard, who has found this on brain scans. She actually showed that in just 8 weeks of mindfulness practice, new meditators grew a part of their brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with attention, positive emotions, emotional regulation, and even empathy. And in the same time, just 8 weeks, they actually were able to shrink a part of their brain called the amygdala, which is in essence the fight or flight trigger of our brains, that fear button. So they were actually in just 8 weeks resculpting, reshaping their brains to be less emotionally reactive, less likely to be emotionally hijacked the way that clearly my father was, and more likely to be able to pause, take their power back, and choose their response to their life circumstances. So what does this look like in life? Well, one thing I've noticed through the years of meditating is that sometimes, and if you talk to any of my friends, you'll hear that I don't always do this, but sometimes I'm able to get in this gap. And when I do, it's as if time slows down. And sometimes when I feel that emotion coming up, I actually see this fork in the road. I know that I can go into the danger of that emotional reaction, but I could also pause, take that breath, and potentially choose that higher road. So how can this look in your life? If you think that being able to transform and alchemize life circumstances might be helpful, I highly, highly recommend beginning a basic daily mindfulness practice. Something as simple as just focusing on your breath for 5 minutes a day can begin this process of resculpting your brain. There are tons of free resources online, including on my website, jamiez.tv. And so you can download meditations and begin this process today. But then that's the training ground. But then what about when the rubber hits the road? You get that phone call with bad news, you get into an argument with a friend or a loved one. In that moment, I recommend this acronym, STOP. So the S is for stop. T is take 3 deep breaths. You can do one with me now. Notice how that feels in your body. And that's actually the next step. The O is observe. So observe your emotions, observe the sensations in your body, and also the overall context of the interaction of the situation. And then the P is to proceed in a way that supports you as well as your highest intentions. Can you imagine? I think back to some of the times in my life when I said or did something I regret. Can you imagine if more people learned to do this? Maybe we would avoid so many of the conflicts we see, both interpersonal and even international. The Dalai Lama has a theory. He has many theories, but this is one. He said, if we taught all 8-year-olds meditation, we would eliminate all violence in 1 generation. And my response, why not try? So I'm now a medical doctor and a health reporter at ABC News. Teaching meditation is a passion of mine, and sharing these techniques has become a huge part of my life. I now have the unique opportunity to travel internationally and share meditation medicine at schools, hospitals, businesses, and at ABC News. This is something that really is my calling. It feels like why I'm here on this planet. And I may never have actually found this calling, my life's work, if it weren't for my dad's tragedy. The Chinese character for crisis, and this is something I hope you can all take home with you, because we all have crises, big and small. Chinese character for crisis contains two sub-characters, for danger and for opportunity. So in every crisis of our lives, whether it's something as simple as getting stuck in traffic or something as huge as being in a concentration camp, in those moments, there's both the danger of falling into that emotional reactivity, our animal brain, and there's also that opportunity to pause, get in the gap, and choose our highest response. It's not always easy, but it is always worth it. So I find that as we learn to transform crises into opportunities, we take the power back in our lives. I believe we can all cultivate this power to transform crises into opportunities in our lives, and I call this a crisitunity. This is exactly what Viktor Frankl found. He found the crisitunity. And if Dr. Frankl could do this from a concentration camp, I mean, come on, what excuse have I got? So really, in our lives, I mean, my dad's tragedy has become my purpose. And every day, even though we never met, his story inspires me to treat people as kindly as possible and also to share this transformational tool that has made all the difference in my own life. I wouldn't have chosen this crisis, but I am grateful every day for the hidden blessings it offered. And why wait for a crisis? What if we could all pause for long enough to make the most of this very moment? We can't always choose what happens to us in life, but we can choose our response and find the crisitunity if we learn to get into the gap. Thank you. Thank you.